welcome again, and thank you for being here this morning. This morning I have entitled what I have in front of me here, Invisible Practice, Only the Mountain Remains. I wrote this a while back, and one of the adventures I have discovered in writing and delivering talks or writing and delivering teachings, whether it's a Dharma talk or a retreat or a theme for a class or something, is that it ends up being a bit of a snapshot of the heart that I had at the moment that I wrote it, and not necessarily the heart I have in the minute when it's time to bring that forth. Sometimes there's a connection and sometimes there's a disconnection. This is probably a pretty good teaching for me this morning, so I'm going to try to remember the person who wrote this. And it may fall on some very fertile soil for me this morning. I hope so for you too. We're going to start with a quote from a woman named Carolyn Myss. Myss is spelled M-Y-S-S. Carolyn spelled probably as you expect. She did a lot of work on a lot of different stuff. I think she's a psychologist, but I mostly spent time with her work on archetypes. What she has for us this morning is, what if God's assignment for you was just live a normal life and be kind while you do it. Stay invisible. Tell no one. What if God's assignment for you was just live a normal life. Be kind while you do it. Stay invisible. Tell no one. It's a very interesting invitation that she offers us. And I first heard that invitation when I was in the left turn lane on Valley View Road in Eden Prairie. And I remember that because I was listening to a recording on my car stereo of her working her way through the archetypes and talking about how the archetypes worked and what that was like for the collective unconscious and all this kind of stuff. And that sentence popped out, or some version of that sentence. This is the quote I found on the internet, but some version of that. Like, yeah, what if hypothetically you could talk to the greatest power available to you in the universe? What shall I do with my life? And you would expect, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I'm at the service of you, great Buddha. And we probably expect the invitation to be something huge. I need you to do something gigantic that's going to involve great sacrifice. I need you to transform your life in some unrecognizable fashion. I need you to twist the shape of your faith or your practice into a form it isn't currently in. And it's going to be very big and very dramatic and very visible, and it's probably going to hurt a lot, but this is what I ask of you, because this is kind of how we tend to think about the scale and the scope. And one of the things that was woven in there, and she wanted all of us to see, was the way we oftentimes imagine how visible our practice is required to be. As many of you know about me, I was raised Catholic, and there's a beautiful tradition in the Catholic faith of martyrs, stories of saints, what we call saints and martyrs, who are normal people who lived a life of some variation of human frailty, acting out of their own defenses, acting out of their own pain, acting out of their own ignorance, their own suffering, causing difficulty for others, oftentimes then being transformed by having some sort of conversion experience. We would call that an awakening, a satori, perhaps, some sort of great revelation of enlightenment. And then their lives are transformed in a way that is extremely dramatic, usually, and they're called to a life of, selfless service, or they found a church, or they start a crusade, or they do something that ends up, being very, very visible and having very, very visible consequences. Hence their saintliness, right? So this kind of stuff makes sense to me. And the reason I chose Carolyn Myss's words today is because what took me a long, long time, well, I didn't see it until I heard her talk about it, what was very difficult to see in that for me was the lovely ego hook of notoriety. Notoriety. Visibility. right? I don't know. There's something about invisibility or just vanish that's very, very terrifying for our ego selves. So even if the ask is big, what I could feel in myself anyway was, well, the ask is big, but the payoff, right, is kind of worth it because there's a visibility too. I'm going to take one for the team, but everyone's going to see because I'm in the middle of the field. Can you feel? I was just aware, oh, there's a little transaction happening in me there. There's still a payoff, for my ego self. And I think it's fair to say invisibility is the ego's deepest fear. It's very, very, very hard for us. I know they did those studies back in, they must have done this a long time ago, because I remember my mom telling me this, and she was a grade school, child psychology, a grade school. She did grade school education, and she talked to me about the studies they did around kids in family systems trying to get their needs met, trying to get attention from the parents, and they'll choose bad behavior and consequences and punishment over being ignored. At that time, I think we were kind of figuring out to be ignored is actually the worst. Negative attention is still negative, but to be ignored is like ego death. It's almost unbearable. What brought this Carolyn Mace quote back to my mind was I was reading a book recently by Ko Yaguma. It's a beautiful, actually, a series of books called Twin Spica. There's a whole series of books called Twin Spica by the Japanese author Ko Yaguma. The Yaguma part I'm sure about. It's the K-O-U that I'm... Cow, maybe? I'll read a short section for you. It was during the fall of my senior year of high school at our school, where far more students got jobs rather than going on to college. By the time the leaves gathered on the ground, no one paid attention in modern Japanese class. Some napped. Some kept their noses in English phrase books and test prep books. One girl waved throughout the class at her boyfriend, who was jogging laps outside around the school grounds. And in between was me, with absolutely no prospects of any sort. You'd have been hard-pressed to find anything attractive about Mrs. E, over 40 and single. Not even us students at that time gossiped about her. Mrs. E suddenly one day closed her lesson book. On my soiled sorrow today, light snow falls again. On my soiled sorrow today, the wind blows again. Mrs. E recited Chuya Nakahara's poem, The Soiled Sorrow, in its entirety, from memory, to her inattentive and uninterested class. This was my favorite poem when I was young, she said. It was the last thing I ever heard her say. Shortly after I graduated, Mrs. E fell ill and died. Once in a while, I'll pass by someone in the street and our eyes will meet. And I wonder if I was born just to be on that street and meet the gaze of that person. I begin to feel that size doesn't matter when it comes to our reasons for living. To be able to do what Mrs. E did, that's not a bad life. I don't think that day's lesson had such an impact on me, but oddly, as time passes, the memory grows brighter. So, for me, these two teachings catalyzed Yaguma's memory of being in a class that nobody was paying attention to a teacher, realizing no one was paying attention, and so reciting a poem from memory. and Carolyn Mace's thought experiment. What if the highest instruction was just do the thing and do it invisibly? You don't need to call attention to yourself. There doesn't have to be a great dramatic sacrifice. There doesn't have to be trumpets. There doesn't have to be a label. No one has to notice. This is an interesting thought experiment, I think, for all of us. I'm not going anywhere with this. There isn't an invitation to a particular course of action. But I do think it's worth looking at how the scaredest parts of ourselves, the most wounded parts of ourselves that create the thing we call ego, that create the thing we call personality, the thing we call sometimes false self, grab on to things to bring attention to become visible, to ask for some inflation of some kind, to recognize that that's happening, and to have the internal integrity to turn toward those wounded parts ourselves, to take care of those things ourselves, rather than asking the world to care for them, rather than asking the big crowd to pay attention to the small part of me that feels insecure or ashamed, to ask the world to rush forward to care for me. It doesn't feel like a fair prospect. It's certainly a selfish prospect, and it's really not the place of practice. So I'm bringing this into a practice setting. This is a Dharma talk, because it's fair to say all of us, to some degree, do this with our spiritual endeavors. We all do. This is what we do. I want everybody to know that I never miss Mass. I want everybody to know that I got up at 4 in the morning to make it to the Zen Center by 5:30 to be there for first bell. I want everybody to know that I chose the path of the Bodhisattva, that I wear the robe, that I memorize the verse. There's nothing wrong with any of these actions, of course. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's beautiful. People express their faith in thousands of different ways. This is not a criticism of action at all. It's just a willingness and an invitation for all of us to become willing to. Can I see the part in me that is asking for visibility and importance? Why is that important to see? Not because it's a sin. It's important to see because there's a very real hurt there that needs the attention of the kind heart that lives right next to it. It doesn't need the attention of the world. The world does not save us from this kind of pain. The world does not save us from our karma. The world is karma. I love this thought experiment. What if the whole thing was just invisible? What if the whole awakening project was invisible? It's a very interesting idea. Suzuki Roshi, a lot of you know that name, Shinryo Suzuki, my teacher's first teacher, said very simply, a lot of you have heard this, and very, very, very challengingly, just to be alive is enough. I'm very fond of quoting that. That short Dharma talk is still working on me. I first read that probably 25 years ago. And sometimes that reminds me that I'm content. Sometimes it reminds me that I'm not content. Sometimes it feels like a challenge. Sometimes it feels like an accusation. I can feel my grasping and my striving and my dissatisfaction with my life and my subtle, usually unconscious idea that maybe the Dharma path will be the thing that, right? Or maybe the new book, or maybe when we retake the House and Senate, maybe when my neighbors move. Just to be alive is enough is a fascinating teaching from a Zen master. No sense there of you got to be a Buddhist. No sense that there's a race or an age or a gender. No sense that there's a state of health. No sense there around needs, ego relationship, layers of awakening, numbers of Kensho experiences. Enough. There's a whole bunch we could, another talk for another day, a whole bunch we could peel apart in that. And there's certainly not an accusation that if you're not content, you're failing. Just to be alive and discontent is also enough. What if my practice was invisible? So invisible it wasn't seen even to me, that it's all the seeds of present moment awareness that I plant may not come to fruition in this life. What if the seeds that I plant bear fruit or turn into trees in future generations? The scale of the Buddhist cosmology that it inherits from its parent, Hinduism, as many of you know, is vast. The sense of scale, the sense of space, the sense of time, that especially Hinduism and Buddhism create is beyond comprehension, purposefully so, right? The amount of time it takes things to happen in the spiritual realm, they go out of their way to say is countless, infinite. I mean, they just go so far out of the way to use metaphors that border on the absurd to remind us you don't necessarily get to see the results of the thing that you do. You trust the results are there. You might experience them, you might not. That's one of the forms the invisibility can take. But I can feel in me the resistant ego that says, I put the dollar in the vending machine and I want the candy now. That's how this happens, right? I set my timer. I sat Zazen. I want the content now. I want the clarity now. I want the peace now. I want it now, and I want to know that those things are related, and then I have proof, and I have something that is visible and obvious to me. I know that this is the right path, and then I can go tell my friends, I did my sitting. I did my sitting. I want everybody to see that. I want it to be known by me, and I want it to be known by others. And there's a complete skipping of the subtle groaning at the bottom of the human experience, of lonely or sad or scared, terrified, angry, enraged, abandoned, neglected. I'm turning away from. It's very important for me to see this, right? So we get to ask ourselves in a very loving way, the way Grandma might. This might not be a parental voice invitation for us. This might be more of a grandparent kind of voice. I use that word metaphorically. What is it that I want other people to know about me? And why? It's a very good question. If you decide to ask this question of yourself, please do it gently. What do I choose to offer? This is about visibility, right? I want everybody to know that I fill in the blank. That'd be a great journal exercise. Here's 10 things you're probably going to learn about me in the first 10 minutes that we meet. These are the 10 things that are going to be the most likely for me to offer about myself. Okay, cool. Now, I want to ask myself, why are those the first 10 things I want you to know about me? Again, no harm, no foul. But I want to know in myself why I felt it important for you to know that I do this, am this, think this, wear this, believe this. Right? I know all of us know this. I know all of us know this tendency that we all have, right? But you have that friend who's like, boy, I bet you rock climbing is going to come up in the first 10 seconds after meeting that person because they got to have the whole world has to know they're a rock climber. Sure enough, boom. Or they have got, all their friends have got to know that they're a Christian, and they're going to tell you that they're a Christian in the first 10 seconds that they meet you. Boom, there it is. Is that a problem? No. Am I criticizing that activity? I am not. But I do see it in myself, as I know I see it in everyone, and I want to know as a Zen practitioner, why? Why do I need you to shine light? Why do I need you to shine light on this thing in me? Why do I need that? What is that about for me? Again, not because it's a bad thing, but because probably there is something hungry and alone in me that is asking for you to do that, and I want to see that that's happening. If I'm asking you to do it, then that means I'm not doing it myself. I need everybody to know what a faithful servant I am of the very just and righteous God that I serve. I want everybody to know of the precepts that I took and the vows I'm trying to live by. I want everybody to know. I just really want to be present to that piece of my karma, the suffering in that karma. I really need to be present to it because only I can liberate it. Only I can be Buddha to that piece. I know you can't. You can't liberate that for me. The world can't liberate that for me. There isn't enough attention from the world, right, to care for that piece of lonely karma. So the idea of invisible practice is actually pretty ancient in Zen. Some of you know Layman Pang, P-A-N-G, probably mythological. Who knows? This is the early Chinese texts. Layman Pang, his wife, and his kid in the texts, sometimes sutra references, sometimes just stories. Wide awake, brilliantly enlightened, almost impossibly advanced, his wife even more so, and their child even more so. Really important in that culture at that time, because it was really important for Zen to have stories, because Zen was trying to distinguish itself, right, from other forms of Buddhism, that, yeah, the monk, nun path was a dharmic path, the priest path was a dharmic path, but also lay people, people who got married, people who had children, which was still not kosher, could also be Buddhas, right? Especially in female bodies. They had a daughter, and Chinese culture and daughters do not, everybody knows that one, right? Wow, wide awake, wide awake, wide awake. Layman Pang, and his highest aspiration was to become, quote, a man of no rank. That was the phrase that's attributed to this, probably fictional, although maybe there was a historical Layman Pang, we don't really know. A man of no rank, in other words, invisible. He was a merchant or something, and I don't remember. But the idea was this is just a guy. This is the guy standing in front of you in Cub Foods. You have no idea who he is. He's wide awake. And he's married to somebody who's even more wide awake, and their kid is even more wide awake, and no one knows. They're invisible. They have no rank. And there's other famous stories of famous, widely sought of lecturers in Japan going from temple to temple lecturing Teishan in the tradition. The Diamond Sutra was his specialty, and he carried the texts all rolled up on his back on the scrolls, going from temple to temple, sought after months in advance to hear him lecture on the Diamond Sutra. He was so brilliant, and he's buying tea cakes from a woman on a cart in the middle of nowhere. She asks him a question about what mind he's using to give those lectures. He can't answer, realizes, oh my God, she's just bested me. She's way more awake than I am. He burns all of his sutras. And then we have much more contemporary examples of this same invisible practice from people like Gary Snyder. Some of you know I say contemporary because 20th century poet out in California. You be the bodhisattva. I'll be the taxi driver driving you home. Perfect expression of just what we're talking about. You be the bodhisattva. I'll be the taxi driver driving you home. And the beautiful paradox there of, you are a servant, I am serving the servant, I am a servant. There's no difference. The beautiful paradox being, invisible practice and visible practice aren't two different things. They're not separable. I am the bodhisattva, because I'm the one who's driving the bodhisattva home. Do we sort of see it? Yeah. So the takeaway here is, the point isn't to hide our practice on purpose under a basket, to go out of our way, to keep it a secret. I'm not inviting us to do that. I'm just inviting us to be very, very friendly and to be very intimate with the layers of ourselves that want to advertise, and to relate to that part of ourself with a tremendous amount of care, because there is suffering there. That's where suffering lives, all the layers, right? There's nothing wrong with being visible. I'm not asking us to be invisible, but I am asking us to use this experiment, this idea to find the parts of us that are hungry and to feed them ourselves and not ask the world to do that. The parts of us that are lonely and bear them witness ourselves instead of asking for the world to do that. And this helps take care of what we see sometimes in others that we find actually very difficult, the stink of Zen. Here comes the Zen person. We all know what that is. And the reason that's actually difficult for us, besides it being behaviorally irritating, on a really deep level, is you're not bearing witness to your own suffering. Your karma is gone unacknowledged. You're asking me to take care of it for you because you need me to remind you how good you are. Can you feel there's something disingenuous there? So that's our thought experiment today. That's all I've got for you today. There'll be more on this, I expect. I feel this is especially prescient. I'm spending a lot of time on this right now because of what's happening in our country and what needs to be visible and what needs to be invisible and what practice looks like and what activism looks like and what engagement and relationship look like. That's why it's on my mind these days. But I thank you for your attention, and thanks for your practice.